The arrogance of the Caravax raiders. The first warning came as a flicker in the stars. Captain Ilian Varda stood on the bridge of the radiant horizon, her sharp eyes narrowing as the faint shimmer rippled across the void. It was subtle, just a tremor in the constellations, but to her, it was unmistakable. "They've come," she muttered, her voice a blend of caution and disdain. The Caravax raiders rarely announced their presence with anything so grand as an invasion fleet. They slipped through space like ghosts, appearing in orbit over unsuspecting worlds, leaving behind only ruins and whispers of their arrogance. Behind her, Lieutenant Mara Solon shifted uncomfortably. "Captain, long-range sensors confirm an energy spike near Hyris Prime's outer moon. The signature matches known Caravax cloaking fields." Ilian clenched her fists. Hyris Prime was a vulnerable colony, its defenses barely adequate to repel a stray meteor, let alone a full raiding force. "Bring us an intercept range," she ordered, "and raise shields. If they're already here, they won't hesitate to engage." Mara hesitated. "With respect, Captain, the Radiant Horizon is a patrol frigate, not a warship. If the Caravax have brought one of their dreadnoughts, they won't risk a dreadnought this deep in a coalition space," Ilian interrupted, her tone icy. "They'll send their faster raiders. It's their arrogance. They think no one can challenge them." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting the ship's trajectory and activating the shimmering barrier of energy shields. Outside, the void stretched endlessly, a silent theater for the coming clash. "Captain," said another voice, deeper and laced with quiet confidence. It belonged to Commander Rick Yen, the ship's tactical officer and Ilian's closest advisor. "If they're here, they'll have scouts watching. We should assume they already know we're coming." "Let them," Ilian replied. "They think we're just another soft target. Let's show them how wrong they are." The radiant horizon slipped into the shadow of Hyris Prime's barren moon, its sleek hull blending seamlessly with the darkness. The crew worked in tense silence, each member acutely aware of the stakes. The Caravax were infamous for their cruelty, their raids leaving shattered lives in their wake. Entire planets had been enslaved or burned under their predatory gaze. Energy spike detected. Mara's voice was sharp now, urgency cutting through the quiet. Multiple vessels decloaking, 3 Raider-class frigates. No dreadnoughts, but they're armed to the teeth. "Of course they are," Rick murmured, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "They always are." Ilian ignored the remark. "Weapons hot. Target the lead frigate's engines. If we can cripple their mobility, we can force them into a defensive position." The radiant horizon surged forward, its thrusters flaring as the first Caravax vessel turned to face them. The raiders' ships were jagged and predatory, their hulls blackened as if to absorb the void itself. Crimson energy beams lanced out from their turrets, slicing through space toward the coalition ship. "Evasive maneuvers," Ilian barked, gripping the edge of her console as the radiant horizon shuddered under the strain of rapid adjustments. The first volley grazed their shields, sending a ripple of energy across the hull. "Returning fire," Rick announced, his hands moving deftly over his station. The frigate's rail cannons roared, kinetic slugs streaking toward the lead Caravax ship. The impact was immediate and devastating. The enemy frigate's engines exploded in a burst of orange flame, leaving it adrift. "Direct hit," Mara reported, a note of triumph in her voice. "Don't celebrate yet," Ilian warned. "The others won't fall so easily." She was right. The remaining 2 frigates adjusted their formation, flanking the radiant horizon and unleashing a torrent of plasma bolts. The bridge trembled as the shields struggled to hold. "Shields at 60%, Mara called out, her hands flying over her console. "They're trying to box us in. They're underestimating us," Ilian said, her eyes blazing. "Rick, overload the starboard batteries and focus fire on the frigate to port." Mara prepared to vent plasma from the aft thrusters. "When I give a signal, we'll use it to blind their sensors." Rick nodded, his grin widening. "A bold move, Captain." "Boldness is all we have," Ilian replied. The plan unfolded with precision. The radiant horizon feinted to starboard, drawing the Caravac's ships into pursuit. Then, with a burst of speed, it veered back to port, its starboard batteries unleashing a concentrated barrage. One of the enemy frigates erupted in a cascade of fire and debris, its hull splitting apart. At the same moment, Mara vented plasma from the aft thrusters, creating a blinding flare that obscured the radiant horizon from the remaining ship's sensors. The Caravac's vessel hesitated, its weapons falling silent as its crew scrambled to recalibrate. "Now!" Ilian shouted. "All batteries fire!" The final Caravac's frigate stood no chance. The coalition ship's weapons tore through its hull, reducing it to a drifting wreck. Silence fell over the bridge as the last enemy signal faded from the scanners. "Status report," Ilian said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Shields at 30%, minor hull damage, no critical systems compromised," Mara replied, her tone relieved. "All enemy ships neutralized." "Well done," Ilian said, allowing herself a small smile. But her expression quickly turned somber. "We've won the battle, but this is far from over. The Caravacs don't retreat. They regroup. They'll send more ships, stronger ones, and they'll remember us." Durek leaned back in his chair, his grin fading. "And what's our next move, Captain?" Ilian stared out at the debris field, her mind racing. "We warn the Coalition. We fortify Hyris Prime. And we prepare for the war that's coming." For the first time, there was no hint of arrogance in her voice, only grim determination. The Caravac's raiders had underestimated them once. They would not make that mistake again. The human counteroffensive. The sky over Belhaven was painted a deep, otherworldly crimson, the aftermath of the orbital bombardment that had reduced Earth's largest cities to graveyards. Amid the smoldering ruins and ash-choked air, humanity's resistance moved like ghosts, slipping between shadows as they prepared to strike back against their oppressors, the Zareth Dominion. Their invasion had been swift, precise, and devastating. What they hadn't accounted for, however, was the resilience of the human spirit. Lieutenant Erin Voss crouched in the hollowed-out skeleton of what had once been a library, her fingers ghosting over the trigger of her plasma rifle. Her green eyes darted to the faint glow of her comms implant in the corner of her vision, awaiting confirmation from her team. The air reeked of burnt metal and decay, but it was the silence that pressed on her chest, a predator coiled to strike. "Alpha Squad, report," Erin whispered into the comlink. Clear on the east flank came the voice of Corporal Matteo Sorin, the squad sharpshooter. His tone was calm, clipped as always. 2 sentries down. No alarms triggered. South perimeters locked up tight, added Sergeant Freya Monroe, her voice rough, shaped by years of survival. "Spotted a patrol heading west. I can set a trap." "Negative," Erin replied. "We stick to the plan. Gather at the breach point." 5 minutes. She rose to a low crouch, scanning the dim ruins around her. The mission was simple on paper. Infiltrate the Dominion's forward base and disable their orbital uplink. Without it, their warships would be blind, severed from the coordination that had made them nearly invincible. What wasn't simple was getting in and out alive. Erin reached the rendezvous point first, her boots crunching softly against debris. Freya was next, her dark braids streaked with ash, her expression as hard as iron. Matteo appeared moments later, his rifle slung across his back, his sharp features betraying nothing of the exhaustion they all felt. "Where's Zura?" Erin asked, glancing around. "On her way," Freya said, but there was an edge to her voice. Before Erin could reply, Zara Torin, the squad's engineer, slid into view. Her face was streaked with dirt, her left arm cradling the makeshift EMP device they'd relied on for so many missions. "Sorry, had to avoid a patrol," Zara muttered, her voice breathless but determined. Erin nodded. "We're on a timer. Once the uplink is down, we'll have 15 minutes tops before they send reinforcements." "Matteo, Overwatch. Freya, you're with me." "Zara, stick close and keep that EMP ready." The team moved as one, navigating the twisted maze of metal and stone that had once been a thriving district. Every step felt like a gamble, every breath a risk. They reached the base's perimeter, a lattice of shimmering energy that hummed ominously. Zara knelt, her fingers dancing over the control panel she'd pulled from her pack. 2 minutes, Zara whispered, her voice tight with concentration. Aaron signaled Mateo to take position on a crumbled overpass overlooking the base. He vanished into the shadows, his movements silent as a predator. Freya stood beside Aaron, her grip firm on her rifle, her gaze locked on the base's entry point. A faint crackle echoed through their comms. "Sentries approaching from the west," Mateo reported. 3. "Armed. Can you handle it?" Aaron asked. "Always," Mateo replied, and seconds later, the muted thump of suppressed shots confirmed it. The perimeter shield flickered and died as Zara finished her work. "We're in," she said, rising to her feet. Aaron led the charge, her squad fanning out in a practice formation. Inside the base, the architecture was alien, its sleek curves and glowing panels a stark contrast to Earth's ruined cities. The team moved swiftly, avoiding patrols and security drones, their every step calculated. At the heart of the base, they found the uplink, a massive spire of pulsing light, its surface alive with incomprehensible glyphs. Zara set the EMP device at its base, her hands trembling as she calibrated the settings. 60 seconds to detonation, Zara announced. "Copy," Aaron replied. "Mateo, report." "Patrols are converging," Mateo said, his voice steady despite the tension. "You've got company inbound from the north and east." Freya grinned, the first hint of emotion breaking through her hardened exterior. "Finally some action." Aaron shot her a warning look. "We're not here to fight. Defensive positions only. We hold until the EMP goes off." The first wave hit like a thunderclap. Zareth soldiers in gleaming exosuits, their plasma weapons spitting fire. Freya's rifle barked in response, each shot precise, lethal. Aaron fired in controlled bursts, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. Zara huddled by the EMP, shielding it with her body as she worked. 30 seconds, she shouted. Mateo's voice crackled in Aaron's ear. "More reinforcements on the way." "You're out of time, Lieutenant." Aaron's jaw tightened. "Hold the line." The team fought with everything they had, but the Zareth were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Freya took a hit to her shoulder, but didn't falter, her rifle blazing. Aaron's plasma rifle overheated, forcing her to switch to her sidearm. 10 seconds. Zara yelled, her voice hoarse. Aaron locked eyes with Freya, who gave her a grim nod. They would see this through, no matter the cost. The EMP detonated with a deafening roar, a shockwave of blue light rippling outward. The Zareth soldiers froze mid-attack, their exosuits shorting out, their weapons falling silent. "Move! Now!" Aaron commanded. The squad retreated, weaving through the chaos as alarms blared throughout the base. Mateo joined them at the extraction point, his face pale but determined. As they emerged into the ruins, the crimson sky was split by streaks of light. Earth's remaining fighters launching a surprise assault on the now-blind Zareth warships. Aaron allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. The tide was turning. For the first time in years, humanity had struck a decisive blow. But as she looked at her battered squad, she knew the fight was far from over. "Let's go," Aaron said, her voice firm. "This war is just getting started." Victory through adaptation. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of Mount Kerith, carrying with it the bitter scent of ash and defeat. Malin tightened her grip on the hilt of her blade, her knuckles pale against the leather wrapping. Beside her, Lauren stood motionless, his face set in the grim determination that had come to define him. The battlefield below was a mosaic of broken shields, fallen banners, and lifeless forms, their stories cut short by the relentless onslaught of the Zareth Dominion. "We can't hold the pass much longer," Lauren muttered, his voice low but edged with urgency. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of reinforcements that would not come. "We don't need to hold it," Malin replied, her voice steady despite the weight of despair pressing down on her. "We need to outthink them." Lauren turned to her, his brow furrowing. "You mean retreat?" "No," she said, her gaze locking onto the distant shimmer of the enemy encampment. "I mean adapt. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Malin had always been the strategist, the one who saw paths where others saw walls. It was why she had been chosen as the commander of the resistance, a ragtag group of survivors bound together by little more than desperation and a shared hatred for their oppressors. But even she knew that strategy alone could not win this war. The Dominion's forces were too vast, their resources too abundant. Every time the resistance found a foothold, it was swept away like sand before the tide. Adapt how? Lauren pressed, his tone verging on impatience. We don't have the numbers, the weapons, or the time. We have the mountain, Malin interrupted, her voice sharp. She pointed to the craggy cliffs that loomed over the pass. And we have their arrogance. Lauren followed her gaze, his expression shifting as understanding dawned. The Dominion believed themselves untouchable, their ranks invincible. They marched in tight formations, their banners flying high, as though daring the resistance to challenge them. They won't expect an attack from above, Lauren said, a glimmer of hope creeping into his voice. Malin nodded. We'll use the terrain to our advantage. If we can force a landslide, we can cut off their advance, and buy ourselves the time we need to regroup. And if it fails? She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the map she carried. Failure was a luxury they could not afford. But the alternative, standing their ground and being overrun, was no alternative at all. Then we fall, she said quietly. Lauren said nothing, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. He had followed her into countless battles, trusted her with his life more times than he could count. If she believed this plan would work, then so did he. As the first light of dawn broke over the peaks, Malin gathered the remaining fighters. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, their armor battered and blood-stained, but their eyes burned with a fierce resolve. They listened in silence as she outlined the plan, their expressions hardening with each word. We strike tonight, she concluded, her voice carrying across the small camp. Every second we delay is a second closer to defeat. But if we succeed, we'll remind them that this war is far from over. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Malin caught Lauren's eye and saw the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. That night, under the cover of darkness, the resistance moved into position. The climb was treacherous, the icy wind threatening to tear them from the cliff face at every step. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was their last, best chance. By the time they reached the overhang above the pass, the Dominion's army had begun its advance. Torches flickered like fireflies in the darkness, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Malin could hear the rhythmic clank of armor, the steady march of boots on stone. She raised a hand, signaling for silence. Every muscle in her body was taut, every nerve on edge. This was the moment that would decide their fate. With a deep breath, she gave the signal. The first boulder crashed down the mountainside, followed by another and another. The sound was deafening, a thunderous roar that echoed through the valley. Chaos erupted below as the Dominion soldiers scrambled to avoid the avalanche of rock and debris. Keep pushing, Malin shouted, her voice barely audible over the din. The resistance fighters hurled stones and debris with all their strength, their cries of determination mingling with the screams of the enemy. The mountainside trembled under the onslaught, each new strike adding to the devastation below. When the dust finally began to settle, the pass was unrecognizable. The once orderly ranks of the Dominion were in disarray, their path blocked by a wall of rubble. Malin allowed herself a small, grim smile. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a start. As she turned to lead her fighters back to the safety of the cliffs, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She froze, her heart pounding. Through the haze of dust and smoke, a figure emerged. Tall, armored, and unmistakably Zareth. The Dominion had not been defeated. They had adapted.